Hello there guys, it's Joey and this is going to be a Goddess Morrigan video. So this is a little bit of a crazy video, not so much in its content, but initially it was going to be just for the product which was requested, and that will be at the end. But this evolved into something. So the set is going to be called Rain in Fire and Blood for the Goddess Morrigan, but I'm going to call the video itself Goddess of Blood or Blood Goddess Morrigan or something along those lines. So this whole feeling that I got came out of the request that a lady had for a set, and she'd had a reading with Arwen, and she came to me and she was like, I need help figuring out what the Bloody Mother means. And we had talked a little bit back and forth and felt about like what was going on with her energetically, which is something I do, and I'm having personal consultation for sets with people. And as I created the two items which are ready, the pillar is not ready yet, and I'm in two minds. I might like wait until it's ready and then put a picture of the pillar at the end and show you the other two items, or just do the video and show you the two bits and then just do the pillar separately. But that's by the by. We'll get to all that side of things right at the end. So if you're here for conversations about the Goddess Morrigan and blood, don't worry, we're going to do all of that first. So when I was asked about this idea of the Goddess Morrigan, about the Bloody Mother, the initial thought that somebody had was talking about like mothers and childbirth and things like that. And I said, well, whilst the Morrigan has children, and she has children in her sort of whole form and her aspect of Mocha, where she has twins on the finish line after the race, and then she curses the men of Ulster to have the birthing pains as a result of their cruelty. I didn't feel that that's what this was about. And I don't feel like we talk about the Goddess Morrigan in terms of blood and blood magic and blood sacrifice and what blood truly means in terms of a witch path very often. And I find myself, I've said, you know, on occasion that I give blood, and I'll hear other people echo it, but I've never heard anybody really sit and talk about what it means and how they perceive it, and the deep gravity of the situation to do with blood and blood magic. Because with blood magic you kind of have like this popular culture thing of, oh my god, it's evil, in that voice, the Diet Coke of evil, just 1 calorie. It's not nearly enough. And so Goddess Morrigan as a goddess of blood seemed to be really important. And as I began to write in my book for the set some notes, and the pages became 3 or 4 of like talking points, and I could pretty much feel Morrigan with her finger on my back, and then too much information for some people, sorry, warning, and I started bleeding, like period bleeding, and I was like, we need to make this video, don't we? And that's kind of like things that happen with gods and goddesses when there's a synchronicity there that needs to be talked about, needs to be really delved into. So I have a few different examples from the mythos as a starting off point, and places to jump from, which is how I feel about mythos in general. I will try and pronounce these right. I will probably pronounce them wrong, and there is always somebody in the out there internety-verse that will correct me. Whether they do it politely or not is depending on the day. So the first one is the Bruden der Choche, the 12th century text featuring the downfall of Cormac, who, whilst on his journey to Ulster for his coronation, he encountered the Babe in the form of the Red Woman, which, by the way, Game of Thrones references. I love that, because now Red Woman means 2 things, and there's like a popular culture reference to it too. So I kind of love that that's happened. Anyway, he encounters her as the Red Woman, washing gore and blood from his chariot in the river with prophecies of doom. And I'm going to try really, really hard not to shout doom at you, because when anybody says doom, I just want to be like, doom! Anyway, just reel it in, reel it in, reel it in. So we're going to go through all the different examples, then we're going to highlight which different examples mean what. In the first battle of Magtured, Morrigan conjures magical mist and showers of blood and fire down upon the warriors of the Firbog in order to help the Tuatha De Danann succeed in Ireland. In another myth, Bave attacks Cuchulainn with a spit, a hearth spit with dog meat on it, and a drop of blood from it touches him and delivers the curse. So there are different analyses of this particular myth, with her fulfilling his downfall, his prophecy, his breaking of his geis, breaking of his oath, and it's to do with the blood drops getting on his skin in some versions, or in him in some versions. Right, this one will be interesting. So the Beva Beldegar, it's basically one of the proper pronunciations, not that I did it, I butchered it, but meaning the red-mouthed war goddess, and it is a title of Bave. In the Tain, there is poetry mentioning blood, and it is usually action mid-battle and regards to frenzy, and this is taken from Morphus Raviana's book, The Blood, and her, I believe it's her translation, her transcription. Blood gushes, fierce fray, lances fed, battle madness. Okay, so those are some from the mythos. The concept of blood in the goddess Morrigan is complicated and embodies several elements. Throughout these examples I have given you, this is my work now, but I've written it down so I remember it all, because goodness is there enough of it. There are several elements: trials, battlefields and sacrifice. Prophecy and consequence, the fulfillment of prophecy, the full cycle nature of prophecy. The nature of who we are, our genetic makeup as symbolized by our blood, the passing down of blood through ancestry, as well as the identification process. So it's not so much necessarily who we are as it is an identifier, very much like Bave is identified red-mouthed, and there is a blood red mouth thing going on with Bave, and this is to do with her eating the being the hooded crow, the scald crow, who eats the dead in order to ferry the souls to the other world. Then there is the rebirthing process by the shedding of blood on the battlefield. This is tied to the sense of self, the sense of self-worth, personal power. You can link it to childbirth, as Morrigan did have her own children as a whole, and as Mocha, which we mentioned earlier, but I don't feel that this is particularly where we want to go with this. Now, I will say that with regards to the art of birth is what I had in my head. The art of birth and the pains that go with it, there is a bloodiness to it, a rawness to it, a state of the art of birth, and birthing into the world is never an easy process, and that can be on a spiritual basis or on a physical basis, and however that might be, there are always birthing pains, and I talked about birthing pains very recently on the blog, so I'm not going to reiterate myself with that, but if you want to hear about me talking about birthing pains on a spiritual sense, you can find that on the blog, blog at starryeyesupplies.co.uk. So then the next one is sorcery. Again, this is very much like our essence in a drop of blood, particularly with regards to victory. So the rebirthing process on the battlefield, whereby warriors, heroes are made, is to do with their, often to do in the Celtic mythos, with their blood loss and bloodlust. So them going after the blood of others and then shedding their own blood, in terms of that makes them a great warrior, they survived, victory. And so their essence in a drop becomes synonymous. So they bleed for their cause, in simplistic terms. Well, excuse me. We have crazy hay fever today, but I was like, no, I'm doing this video, so. And it's tied to sorcery with regards to the goddess Morrigan conjuring blood and mist, and it was particularly with regards to victory, but also it gave the crossover that it's considered that the goddess Morrigan was around before the Tuatha De Danann, and she assisted them in their victory. She kind of joined up with them, and as such, that the mingling of bloods in the mist could be seen with that sorcery. So there is a connection to sovereignty. Shall we do that one first, or should we cover the other ones in a bit more detail first? Let's do sovereignty first. We kind of touched on it. So the goddess Morrigan is very much associated with personal sovereignty, the personal queen archetype. She's known as the Phantom Queen, and generally speaking, people will consider Mocha the main sovereign of the three, although I have again talked about how I came to terms with personal sovereignty in terms of Bave working, which is where I fall on the spectrum. So blood in the land. One of the goddess Morrigan's birthrights as such, or a goddess right if you like, was the right to determine and to dispatch a worthy ruler, as shown by Cormac. In the myth, where she prophesies his doom and chooses him to be an unworthy ruler, and therefore, you know, bye-bye. It's also true in the case of Nuada, who lost an arm in battle and was no longer seen as whole, so he was not able to be king. That's not necessarily a Morriganic myth, but it is a good example of kings needing to be physically whole, and queens, in order to for the, in fact, land to be as whole. So the land was said to directly reflect the physical, emotional and mental well-being of the ruler. They were one. There was a symbiosis between ruler and land in the Celtic tradition. Therefore, the blood flowing through a whole vessel, to my mind, correlates directly to the lifeblood flowing through the earth and the land. There is a symbiosis on the blood level between the blood flowing through the veins of a ruler and his or her land. So it becomes that interconnectedness that we have talked about, we, me and Chris, of ancestors being of the land, and we are being, you know, we're being birthed from land. There is no disconnection. We are all parts of one giant ecosystem, which is something that I have talked about at length recently, and I've been working with ancestry work and spirit work and otherworld work, and this has kind of brought it back to a place of sovereignty here. So the blood flowing through the whole vessel, the blood flowing through the man or woman in charge of the land, is directly reflected, directly connected to the blood flowing through the earth. And they are reflections, they are mirrors of one another. There is historical evidence to suggest the Celts sacrificed their kings to the gods in bog bodies found in Ireland. The best archaeological data is the body of a man placed in the Lido bog, blah, 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 and he was ritually sacrificed. He was strangled, hit on the head, and had his throat cut in a quick succession, which mirrors the threefold death referred to in medieval Irish tales. He was a high-ranking, willing participant. So there's physical evidence here of kings and people of high stature willingly bleeding, sacrificing, bleeding out, because cut a throat, bleeding out, in order to give offering and honouring to the land. There is history of blood sacrifice, of human sacrifice. And so this concept of lifeblood into the ground is something that is very real to the ancient Celts, in terms of it would be physically carried out. Now there are Roman sources that, and historians if you like, that also talk about the Druids and the Celts and their blood sacrifices. But the problem with that, and one of the reasons that I'm not going to go into it in depth, is it's Romans. And the Romans had a very clear religious agenda amongst a conquering agenda. And so it's a little bit hit and miss with that sort of thing. So they do exist, those sources do exist, and if you want to find them by all means, you know, do the work. But for me, the archaeological example is perhaps a little bit more terra firma. That's an earth pun. Ooh, ooh, earth pun by an earth sign in a blood earth topic. That's a triple death right there. I love the idea of the symbolic triple death being, and that kind of being paralleled, because triple, 3, is very important to the Celts in terms of life, death and rebirth, and the Triskele and spirals and all that. Magic number 3 is the magic number. Anyway, so the blood and the land are very much interconnected within the mindset of the Celts, to the point where the nobles and kings willingly bled out, willingly died, and embraced themselves into the earth in order to make the land abundant, to feed their kin. So what I have written from this point, and I'm going to loop back because we're going to talk about the other points before we talk about the final point. So this point is obviously sovereignty. In modern times, many pagans talk about blood offerings, blood magic, particularly to goddesses such as Morrigan, without either realizing or perhaps even caring in some cases about the true gravity of the blood sacrifice. It is handing over a part of our undiluted essence in pure honoristic sacrifice, and also hands us over to her to be tested and measured. Blood doesn't lie. Now we have to be careful with the concept of blood doesn't lie, because some racists will jump right on that, and that is not what we're talking about. The connotations and the meanings that are given to blood types and whatnot, that's humans. That's human interpretation. That's in the mind. That's subjective at best, tainted at worst. But the blood of something doesn't lie. The blood can tell you where you came from, your genetics, your forebearers, your origins, if you like, land of origins, and things like that. It will also tell you if you are sick. It will also tell you all sorts, you know. That's why they take blood tests. It can tell you, like, not just sick, but like imbalances of hormones in the body, imbalances of this, that and the other in the body. Blood is a pretty powerful entity, if you like, energy, if you like, component, if you like. And I don't really think that people really truly realize that when they give parts of their blood to the goddess, that what they're actually doing is kind of invoking human sacrifice. They're kind of invoking a willing bleeding out for a goddess such as the goddess Morrigan, whom is battle frenzied. You know, there is no light, fluffy element of this, and I enjoy light, fluffy elements, same as everybody. Hey, crows. And you should enjoy the light, fluffy elements and embrace those words and embrace the unicorn side, because it's necessary. It's not separate like some people seem to think it is. I don't think, anyway. Again, it's my opinion, but take it or leave it. So I don't think some people realise, but the bleeding on land is, and it honours all those many deaths, willing and some perhaps not willing. And I always talk about how land was shaped by battle and the blood that was spilled on the battlefield. And this is how I believe the idea of battle and sovereignty are interwoven through blood and blood magic with regards to the goddess Morrigan and other war gods, but we're focusing on Morrigan. So the great sacrifices on the battlefield are basically the shedding of blood all over, and it's seeping into the land, and the land becomes defined by it, both quite literally and politically, symbolically. The bleeding of many men has altered the shape of land and where borders and boundaries have been placed, and it's all to do with hubris and human hubris, and we own the land and we don't, the land owns us. But human beings are so keen to put their stamp on everything and say that they are in charge of everything. So it's kind of like the goddess Morrigan kind of winks through this mask, almost like, well, you can own this land, but you don't really, because you're bleeding out for it, and at some point you will bleed out for it, because the rulers were quite literally sacrificed. So there is a truth in blood. There is no lie in blood. Your honor and your intention is carried in your blood very vehemently. So blood magic is true, blood doesn't lie. And this is why throughout the history of magic there is so much emphasis placed on blood magic, and blood is often used as a contract, as a binding, because it is literally pushing life through your veins. You cannot exist without it. It regulates you and pushes, poison out, so on and so forth, and cleanses out, and diseases of the blood can be debilitating to the nth degree. And it is just your life essence flowing through your veins. It is part of your makeup, and it is just you. And it has this sacredness to it because, you have the divine within you. And so blood is just an expression of divinity and divine flowing, I guess. Some people, as a result, will not cut themselves and shed blood. Although whenever anyone gets particularly icky about it, I point out that most women have access to blood once a month without hurting themselves. Although it doesn't feel like that, to be honest. And I feel you ladies right now, so there we go. We're going to move on to that point in a minute, but we are going to talk about the points that we talked about already. So we're going to go back to the beginning, where we talked about prophecy. So I've already talked about the fact that sorcery, with the first battle of Mertured, which I'm probably butchering, and the fact that Morrigan showers magical mist of blood and fire down upon the warriors of the Firbolg. So there is this this sorcery element to it. I thought I had made more notes about that. No, I didn't. Okay. I did mention about the crossing over into a different tribe with this. This is kind of like an act of pure magic, and I felt like there might have been an intermingling of blood in that mythos, like she became part of the Tuatha De Danann through this act. But I feel like the prophecy element is really, truly interesting, because in every element where prophecy is mentioned, there is a blood element, and the washer at the ford is a prophecy of death and doom and despair, and she's always washing the blood-stained clothes of he or she who is about to die. And I feel like the washing away of blood, and it interconnects with her connection there with rivers, which we'll talk about in a minute, is really, truly interesting, because it's the washing away of lifeblood, and blood becomes water through that washing process. And it's kind of like the dilution of lifeblood and essence back into water, which is a conduit to the other world in the Celtic tradition. So it's very much about preparing the dead. It almost has a natural embalming feel to it, but it's also a matter of prophecy. It's a matter of speaking that which is about to occur. And the goddess Bave in particular is red-mouthed, and we've talked about how that can be synonymous with her eating the dead and the carrion, and that being, again, ferrying to the other world. But it's also a sign of prophecy, because blood is intermingled here with prophecy all over the place. It's in poetry, it turns up in places with regards to the fulfillment of prophecy, with the spit and curculan and the blood drops, and it's present in other Celtic myths as well. There is some really truly interesting bits and pieces with regard to it. So there is the red-mouthed Bave. It's very much about her voice in a lot of cases as well, her battle scream, her banshee scream. It's very much to do with death and putting the fear of goddess into the enemies, the shrieks, the shrills, and I love voice work. I love everything to do with it, the spoken word, the power behind one's spoken prophetic words and poetry. I love that that's where the emphasis is, and that kind of identifies blood, the red mouth, with regards to prophecy. I usually paint mine, particularly if I'm doing invocational work, and make a big thing around the mouth. I usually use the Arwen symbol though, which is the Celtic symbol for divinational inspiration, divine inspiration, sorry. So there is this kind of, we are all interconnected to the grand ecosystem that I talked about earlier, and therefore prophecy is already in our blood, because we are already connected to the things that shall be and the things that were, and it already sings in our blood. The voices of our ancestors sing in our blood. The voices of the gods sing through our blood, and if we can hear and speak that, then prophecy comes through. Okay. The rebirthing process, or the shedding of blood on the battlefield, the sense of self-worth and power, our essence in a drop. So presumably, although this is kind of, okay, yeah, that's me thinking, because I'm about to go into the next topic and I don't want to ruin that by saying that. So we'll rewind. And that's my rewind noise for the day. You're welcome. So the rebirthing process by the shedding of blood on the battlefield. We've talked about how land is reshaped by literal blood sacrifice onto the ground, but also men were and women were. And the Celts were often marked by their prowess in battle. They used to go raiding. They used to have an honorific system of raiding and war. And these were two things that sort of proved the mettle of men and women. And so therefore them bleeding for their cause, in a very literal sense, was them honouring their gods, honouring their way of life, and finding honour and prestige within their own lives. They were shaping themselves. It's kind of almost like a blood magic magician thing going on, whereby the act of war was synonymous with the act of self. I am who I have conquered, I am who I have bled for, and we can put this into concepts today, although they might be a little bit more abstract today for most of us. Obviously, those who have participated in war have a different retelling. And that's not something I'm getting into right now, because that's a whole video unto itself, whether or not I feel that war is the same as personal war. And I've already kind of done that anyway. So finally, and perhaps with most relevance to the requested spell set, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the idea of blood, medicine, poisoning and healing. Goddess Morrigan is tied inextricably, symbiotically to rivers. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the lifeblood of the land can be tied to rivers. So the way that rivers work, they are the lifeblood of the land, they flow through the land, they bring life, quite literally. And the Celts, as we've already said, saw this as a conduit to the other world. So the interconnectedness with as above, so below, that the rivers were a conduit, and the Celts would leave offerings, or swords and all sorts actually, within rivers, because they were conduits to the other world. So Morrigan being tied to rivers, particularly caves with rivers going through them, were seen as entrances to her realm of the other world. She mated with the Dagda by a river, and her sacred entrances are also thought to be over rivers, which are also considered to be transformative and healing. She also has an attacking healing exchange with Cuchulainn in the Táin, and when a king is too diseased, he is removed, the land is healed. So in the Cuchulainn myth, there's a whole interplay with her attacking him, and then she kind of, depending on how you interpret the myth, then she kind of tricks him into healing her, and there's basically this symbiotic thing between the two of them going on, and she's healed from the experience. So there's like a healing attack reflection going on there. When a unworthy ruler was removed or sacrificed, human sacrifice as we talked about earlier, the land would be healed by it. So Morrigan has this kind of healer of the land element to her. Also, wounding and blood flow is frequently mentioned as a mark of worth and prestige, and presumably for those warriors to claim their prestige, and mostly, not always, but you know, they came through it. They were healed in some way or another in order that they might wear their battle scars and live to fight and honour the Morrigan another day. Wound cleansing, as a side note, I love history, on the battlefield was quite often, quite literally also blood and fire. to burn through infection and cauterize the wound, much like the reference to blood and fire earlier with regards to the goddess Morrigan and her sorcery. The art of healing is often synonymous throughout cultures, but also within the Celts, with healing. So there are elements to seeing the Morrigan as a healer. It's not the easiest jump, and it's not necessarily the I'm not going to say to you that the goddess Morrigan is about like kissing your wounds, because it's, well, maybe kissing your wounds, but not quite as I meant it initially. It's not a sweetness. It's very much a brand of honor with regards to bleeding and wounding and trials and tribulations and suffering, because many people ask me, you know, the goddess Morrigan's path seems to be hard. It seems to be full of trials and tribulations. And I say, you know, warriors are forged. They're made. We're not born necessarily. No, in fact, we're just not born naturally grizzled warrior strong, and however that takes shape. The warrior is the archetype which helps us to power through and helps us to acclimatize and put meaning to our trials and sufferings. And I don't feel like the Morrigan creates trial and suffering. I just believe that life is what life is, and human beings are what human beings are, and the Morrigan might give us the more difficult lessons up front quite quickly and force us to survive, force us to adapt, and then force us to evolve in that process. And if you get stuck on one of those processes, then you've got problems, because you are stuck at a point without pushing past. And I really do feel like those are 3 steps to do with Morriganic path walking. She's also big on if you have a wound to fester, then it is time to bring out fire and blood. You must bleed that wound out, and you must burn it away. And you must burn through the infection. That's shadow work in terms of a symbolic meaning. And then you must cauterize, and you must stand up and keep fighting. So that's probably it. I'm going to show the 2 items now and talk a little bit about them. The pillar is not ready, but if you don't care about that, we're done. If you do care, hang on. Hang on to me, my darling. Anyway, so this is the smudge. If you are, look at that shiny. If you are on my Instagram, you have seen this already. Battlefield in a tin. So this creates the battlefield of the goddess Morrigan, the blood sacrifice to the goddess Morrigan in order to reshape the land. It is a smudge which is about personal sovereignty and taking responsibility for one's borders, and that means in terms of where one lives, that means in terms of one's self, that means in terms of one's relationships, that means the whole shebang. It's very much about creating borders and creating lifeblood within oneself. You create life, you create your lifeblood. You put meaning to things, you bleed for what you believe in. So it creates that battlefield. Perhaps it's a battlefield you've already been through and you're passing through, and you can see the fallen parts of yourself, and in order to pass into the other world and be reborn, you must just bleed that last drop. It got deep in that description. And then we have the oil, which is basically, hello, the same thing. Look at this. Look, just, yeah. I need some. So there will be a pillar. The pillar is a dark red with a smoke top. I'm probably actually just going to upload this video, and then I will just attach the image and send the lady the image separately, because this is a super freaking long video already, and I really wanted to make it and talk about blood, the goddess Morrigan, sacrifice, the bloody mother, and all that good stuff. Right, I'm out of here. You can't stay here, but you gotta get fluxy. I'm trying new things. I'm trying new taglines at the end. Get real, get fluxy, get real, get fluxy. No, okay. I'll think of something better. I'll try. So thank you guys for joining me. Many blessings.